the person behind the initiative of what we're doing at the Metaverse and kind of bringing that open source voice to the Linux Foundation. And to my right?
Tobe, testing.
No audio.
I'm working.
There we go.
1, 2, 3.
No, mic 2's down.
Hello.
Hey. Technology.
Hey everyone, I'm Tobe. I am the principal game engine architect at Huawei, and yeah, I think I'm sitting here with a split personality in a sense that on the one hand I kind of represent what's going on at Huawei with the Metaverse stuff, and on the other hand I also tend to have a personal opinion on this, so we'll see how that goes.
Hi, I'm Chris Melisinos at AWS, 25-year video game nerd and veteran. I work on the Game Engine Developer Services team, and I focus on Open3DE, business development and strategy globally for AWS.
Fun. I love that the faces are changing in this room, too, from earlier. Melanie Cutland, I'm a managing director at Accenture. I lead our XR and blockchain talent as part of our Metaverse Continuum Business Group. Oh, you're good.
Hi, I'm Matt Kemp. I am a game director at Hadean. I've been working with MMOs for getting on for 20 years these days, and focus very much on distributed computing, distributed simulations in the cloud.
Hi, my name is Shazan. I lead 3D engineering and ecosystems at Cesium. We build platform for 3D geospatial, and I've been introducing it to a lot of game engines. We added a gem for O3D, and here to share my thoughts on bringing real-world content into game engines.
Awesome. All right, so the way it'll work is we have a series of questions that we're going to ask and present to the panel. We get about 8 minutes or so for each one of them. If it gets too rowdy or people kind of go nuts about it, I happen to have my little ducky here from Backtrace, and that is going to address, which means knock it off, and then I have to throw it. So, or somebody can give me one of those to throw. But other than that, it's an active conversation, where we kind of get in, we talk about our opinions, throw the ideas across from different perspectives. You ready? Here we go. All right, first question here. Should we have a definition of the metaverse, and what do we think the metaverse will represent in the future?
So I'm going to be quite blatant and say the answer to the first part of the question is no, we shouldn't have a definition. So if there's one thing, so I think we've learned from how the internet was put together and how that has developed over time, it is the creative communities and the creative economy which is going to drive what the metaverse will be. And if we try and put rails on these people's thinking, then we'll end up not taking it forward as fast as we can do. However, the second part of the question is probably more interesting for me, because that is, what do we want the metaverse to be? What's the North Star for the metaverse? I think that's the bit that we should all have an opinion on, so we're all driving towards something. And to me, that is just simply a case of having somewhere which has sort of this persistent and immersive place for all sort of digital content to come together, whether that's Web 2, whether we even know what that is, Web 3, 3D worlds, anything like that comes together in one place where we can experience it all together. Discuss.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the definition thing is, of course, a big problem, right? You don't want to limit people's creativity in that regard. But I think since we're all working as engineers, in a sense, on this grade 3 engine, is that we should have at least have a problem that we want to actually attack. It's not that we're inventing the metaverse and then later figuring out what is it actually good for. It should have a purpose. It should make people's lives better. And in order to do that, I mean, yes, the internet didn't have a definition when it came up with, but at least it had a goal, even though a small one. It doesn't have to do anything with what we see today, but it was there to create a new communication medium. That was the purpose. That was the problem that was being solved. And I think the metaverse, if we're sitting here and we're not reading too many sci-fi books, we should have an equal purpose that this solves and attacks.
So I would agree, and so I would say yes, and to your point of what is the problem that we're actually trying to solve for it, we live our lives between these two parallel spaces through our physical space and through our digital representation. And the question then becomes is how can I take everything that I am in the physical world and the type of things and services and needs that contextually and also match those up to the things that I do online? What is how do I, authenticate my identity in the real world with this kind of virtual space? So for me, the metaverse isn't about just, VR headsets and haptic gloves and swimming around in this stuff. It's also the very simple transaction, the low friction transaction of authenticating, yes, this digital thing, this digital service is asking to identify, or me to identify my physical self with it. So there's a level of security and identity that moves seamlessly through all of the different services that I require in meet space and in virtual space, right? And so when you think about the metaverse and what it could become, it's not a single implementation, it's not a single modality. It's the blending of our entire existence through any modality, any device, any experience between both sides of that. And so it's much bigger than just a set of technologies. We have to fundamentally, I think, shift the way we think about our digital selves being represented in our physical lives and back again. Big, big, big problem to solve for.
No problem. So I think I agree. I don't think we need to box ourselves into a definition. I think what we can also think about is whether, for example, in, let's say, 7 to 10 years, whether we will even use the term metaverse, or does it just become the internet as we know it? We've gone through iterations of this through, for example, Web 2. Nobody says Web 2 these days. If you ask probably the younger generation, they don't even know what Web 2 is. It's just the internet, or it's the smartphones, or it's the AR filters on Snapchat and other things. So I think the way to approach it is, or one way to approach it is that it's the next big jump in how we connect to each other. We saw this with in the late 90s with email, search engines, and the early social media. And then as the iPhone and smartphones came out, we saw the next level of immersion. And now I think over the last 3-4 years and going forward, I think what we're seeing is that now we have enough computing power in all types of devices, including our watches, that they are able to power new types of experiences that we haven't seen before. And not just experience, but applying them to real-world problems, real-world use cases, and connecting all of those in a single ecosystem. So that's one way to look at it, is that all of our devices have this new power in them that we can combine them to provide single experiences like was added before. It's not just one type of device or everything has to be on your headset. No, it's going to be everything everywhere, connected persistently across all types of devices, users, and industries.
All right, I'm going to two-part answer and agree and disagree for fun. Because I do think when we launched our digital business years ago, we said, every business was going to be a digital business, and we said after a while it's going to go away, right? Like digital is just everywhere, and we did. We ended up with infighting everywhere because we're like, this project is my business unit, and this one's my business unit because it's digital. Like, of course everything's digital, but really what happened is, like during COVID, everyone had to get digital even if they weren't digital, right? So like the corner store had to create online ordering, and that's a huge trend that forced us to like say, okay, we're all now digital, so now what? I think the industry is just looking for language to say now what, right? Like what's next? If we're all digital now, how are we going to take tokenized and immersion and collaboration and kind of join together in that in a new way? But I will disagree that I don't want a common North Star, because how boring is that there's one North Star in the world that we're all headed towards? Don't we all want to create our own North Star and go create a community around making that happen? How cool would it be to have lots of futures? I want to follow them all.
I guess that depends on how north the North Star is. So what I'm thinking about a North Star is almost like what's the thing for humanity that we're trying to do with the metaverse? What are we trying to create there? Because if we have a specific thing, such as we expect it to be a 3D world, I don't think that's going to work. But it is, to me, this North Star is about connecting those digital experiences, and they are all over the place, and it's only going to be more of them coming. So how do we connect it? It doesn't matter what that looks like right now. That's the exciting journey towards this thing. But for humanity itself, I'm making this really big now, for humanity itself, connecting us digitally allows us to connect emotionally, allows us to bring humanity to a better place through our digital connections.
So, bonus round, since nobody gave a definition. But the bottom line is you have to still convey what is the metaverse when it's asked to you. Okay? So, 10 words, what's your definition? How would you explain it? Somebody says, what's the metaverse? In 10 words. Got to do it quickly.
The Matrix.
Blending our existence across any modality from physical to digital. 11 words. But
I think it's immersive collaborative experiences that take advantage of the tokenization of everything.
I think it's about bringing our real life into the digital world and being able to live within that world.
Boy, they just murdered 10 words.
I feel like I'm just going to be stealing ideas from the four of you. Probably some. I think it's going to be the next evolution of the internet that is built around 3D immersion and identity.
So the interesting thing is, this is what happens when people ask, what is the metaverse? And this is why it's so difficult. I would say that is a true statement across the board. All right, next question. Where do we think we'll see it first?
Okay. I think we'll, maybe controversial opinion, but there's certainly a case to be made that we are already seeing it in some places.
That's controversial.
You could argue, for example, I know sponsors are AWS here, but you could argue that having the robots in Amazon's warehouses going and picking up the items, and everything gets shipped to you with only the delivery person actually picking it up and bringing it to your doorstep. That is a metaverse with all of the devices that are connected. There's potentially other metaverses out there that are up and coming. So there's certainly things that are out there that are heading towards what we will call the metaverse. Now, of course, we need a lot more people, a lot more industries, a lot more devices to truly feel that way. The other way we will see that up and coming is probably industries that are adopting digital transformations really fast, who don't have the entrenchment of existing devices and sunken investments that they're like, oh, I need to invest X billion dollars to upgrade all of my hardware. It's much easier for somebody who is brand new to the technology and investing new to IoT devices and people, and how somebody's going to go from manual work to digitization of it. I think we are going to see a lot more immersion coming from those areas.
So I sort of think about where we're beginning to see it right now. So there's a whole bunch of industries very excited about the metaverse, making steps towards it. I mean, you've got retail, you've got sport, you've got a whole bunch of other ones as well. But which of these is going to be the first that actually creates the right business model to actually make it successful for them? Because the first place we're going to see it is the industry which understands the business model of the metaverse and can make it work with their business model in order to take it forward. Where that's going to be, I think we're still trying to find that out. It's a cop-out answer, I'm sorry. But it all boils down to, where does that business model first match what the metaverse can deliver for it? If I think about gaming in particular, because that's where my background is, when I was at Gamescom earlier this year, I was having a lot of conversations with indie developers about what they thought the metaverse was, and most of them just completely didn't want to talk about it at all. But when you explain to it, like, just consider it as almost like a marketing channel. You're going to have millions of people running around this 3D world. It's a marketing channel. Does that make it exciting for you? And then suddenly the connection's there of, yeah, I want those millions of people playing my game. So maybe that's a way forward for it as well.
I'm going to turn your who's going to do it first to a challenge of hurry up and build the software and hardware so we can get there. like there's so much we need, right? And so, we'd arguably textbook Accenture answer should be we've got 100,000 people in our virtual experiences, right? And they're onboarding through the metaverse, and we're giving them one Accenture Park and all of these cool enterprise scale things. But like, it doesn't yet have tokenization of things. They can't buy the T-shirt. They can't move it from environment to environment. We don't have all of the pieces and parts to it yet, because we need to hurry up and build it. And we need better hardware and we need better software to be able to have the experiences. Our clients every day they see the value of the new trends of buying behaviors, but they can't get there yet. So these are still custom builds. These are still custom solutions. Like, hurry up as an industry so we can have the software and the services and the hardware that actually enable doing this blend from real life to physical, because it's we're still early days in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we talk about there are 5 things that are going to be required for the metaverse to emerge in all of the ways we're thinking about it, right? Open standards, open platforms. We don't get there without relying upon open communities, because there isn't any one company that can actually account for every possible use case or interconnected system, right? So it's open platforms, it's interoperability, it's content creation at the edge. How are you going to fill up these increasingly vast spaces, right? You have to make it easier for people to contribute their ideas, thoughts, wants into this space. You have to have scalability at the edge and back in a way that we just still haven't even seen. And you're going to need identity and security. You cannot authenticate your real self to your digital self in a way that then migrates between those different environments. That's a huge problem, right? So we have some very fundamental, I think, as an industry, issues that we have to tackle. But I also, when you ask, where are we going to first experience this? I think about friction in the system, right? And what I truly believe, and I've maintained this for years, is that people care about the fidelity of contact over the fidelity of content. And by that, I mean, if I need to talk to, perfect example, my daughter just messaged me before we got on here. She just got an internship offer from a large company, right? I could have used, yes, you can applaud that. Thank you. I'm so proud of her. Good job, kiddo. But the point was that it was this immediacy of, it was text-based, can you call me? It was jumping into the hallway to see her on FaceTime real quickly, right? Instead of, let's go find a telepresence center where we have this super big, no. What I cared about is the immediacy of this transaction. And so, for the metaverse, it is that, and it's VR, and it's haptic suits, and it's these incredible immersive experiences. So where I believe people are going to experience the opportunity the metaverse provides is going to be in the lowest friction, most distributed system we have, which is the browser. It is the web. It is the closest thing we have to a universal translation technology in the world, from cheapest Android devices to Threadripper desktops. Right? What that looks like, how that will be experienced, we've yet to discover again as an industry, right? As technologists, as companies. But that feels like where most people will experience what we then call the metaverse for the first time.
Yeah, I like that you have like this small list of 5 things to attack. You said something about the industry should hurry up. There's so many things to do, but I guess one problem in seeing it anywhere first is John Carmack gave this wonderful speech when he started his metaverse exploration at Facebook, and I remember this expression he used that we have to be careful not to become architecture astronauts. He called them, this typical thing that you're designing an architecture and you blow it up to such proportions that nobody can manage it, and it becomes this huge unmanageable thing where you need to build thousands and thousands of subsystems just to make it work. I think this will be an evolutionary process, and there will be small steps that we take that are dependent on the users, of course. They have requirements first, and I think the first part, to see the metaverse in real life, if it's not a gimmicky thing, is probably going to be in a new generation of people, possibly games, I would say, as a first step, because this is the place where people are used to create content, where people are used to create their little 3D worlds, where they invite people over where you have microtransactions, for instance. They're not tokenized. They might not even be blockchain-y thingy or something like that. But look at popular MMOs like EVE Online, for instance. These are hugely parallel worlds where people spend their lives in. So I think that is maybe not the metaverse, but it's a prototype to see how people will interact with such a world.
The place where people are going to first adopt.
Yeah.
They're already predisposed to adopting new modalities, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So-
And it takes a new generation because I still have family members who can't deal with the internet. And Sherry said this morning, you have to dream big where you include the people that can't handle the technology. Right?
Yeah, yeah. So, lightning round on this. Possible choices. What hardware do you think is going to appear on first? Phone/AR, VR, PC, or don't know? Actually, don't know is not an option because you can't pick that one.
Phones.
Yeah, phones.
Yeah, phones.
Yeah, I think phones as well. I mean, the I think it's.
Yeah, we dodged that bullet fast.
We're done.
That's a good question.
We solved it.
That's a good question. Native or web?
So before we jump to that, the thing I want to add is, especially if you look at the developing world, they are skipping generations of technology. Like they don't even have credit cards; they just go mobile payments, and that's what's happened. Most of them don't have computers or laptops or iPads; they just have phones, and everything happens on the phone. So that's why I think it'll be phones. Native or web?
Native app or web?
I think you will start seeing that the lines get blurred. The game engines become the web. I think that's what will happen.
That sounded like an other.
I'm genuinely believe in that our game engines, including O3D, Unreal, Unity, anything else, we will start seeing those become the browsers of the future, essentially.
Gotcha. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's very sensible. I think how it's going to physically be done or how it's going to be made, it's going to be a combination of you're going to have to use the power of your phone to be able to do it. But no phone's got enough power to create what you need to create. So it's got to be streamed via the web as well. But you can't stream everything via the web because that's not going to work in places where you don't have the great reception to access it. So it's going to be this combination of how does it work. And I expect there'll be many solutions that will pop up over time which will service different use cases and situations that people find themselves in.
Both directions. I think it's an interesting challenge of like on your phone, what are you going to do? And I like your friction point because like I think we all immediately went to there's no friction on a phone and how are you going to engage with it? But like bringing in a gaming engine to your phone is a whole new fun thing. So I'm quite fascinated by it. I'd be curious how many people are working on Metaverse for the phone. Because we all quickly answered the question. You got a unanimous answer, but I'm not sure we have any vendors actually out there working on Metaverse for the phone. I mean, yes, we've done AR. We've been doing AR forever, right? We had people at a conference last week, like, scan a QR code, and the little person pops up, and we get volumetric video all tied into it, and like, yay, we're in the Metaverse. I think there's so much more in the future of it, but no friction.
So I think, from my perspective, there is no difference. Web is native. With the advent and the advancements we've seen in HTML5 through WebAssembly, Web GPU, these sorts of things, we're already starting to see big engine games, big engine experiences being brought down directly to the web. And the wonderful thing about the web is that it normalizes and equalizes access to everybody, right? So you remove a lot of the barriers for integration, for jumping in. It's no longer, did I download this app and where did I put it in? Oh, it got removed from my phone because I wasn't using it for a period of time. So now all of that's removed when it's all behind a web link. And we talked about our kids not using the web. They use the web, they just don't call it that because it's an app, right? Which is just nothing more than an application running on the back end on the server. You have to be able to augment that with cloud at the edge. right, to the point that was made down here before, not every phone is going to be able to render everything all the time that you want. So how do we go into leverage, again, decreasing cost, increasing power of compute at the edge with now ubiquitous high-speed access that is pretty much blanketing the planet? Huge opportunity. So I don't see it as web or native. I just see it as the web being the container through which the experience are delivered. All right.
I'll agree. I think like the problem with the phone is we're all aware that there's a huge technical issue that we're facing. But I think the reason why everybody immediately answered phone is because it's I'm not dragging around my PC all the time. This is the only true device that I carry around through my life, and if the metaverse truly is like this blending of my real life with my digital life, then it has to follow me everywhere. So,
yeah, okay. So the next question here, because that was a bonus question, good one by the way. Who's the largest target that will use the metaverse, and how old are they today?
Did you say how old are they
Today. Who's the largest target?
I'll start. I think we underestimate the fact that a CIO will be the buyer decision maker for some of the first enterprise metaverse products. And when they say yes, and their entire workforce has access to it, ta-da, there isn't how many phones are there. There is literally how many employees do I have, and now this is a collaboration technique of my company. That changes the deployment game. That's not how many headsets can I get in hands, how many devices can I get in hands. That's, I have a laptop, this laptop's now enabled to go do this thing when I flip a switch, right? So if I've got a collaboration tool today, I've got Zoom, I got Teams, I got whatever, and they add new layers to it, and they flip a switch, and the deployment is everywhere, like they will be the first from the sense of being able to do one decision maker hits it at scale. I don't have to convince an employee to use a meeting tool. We just use meeting tools. Like we have meetings, we do business, and so it's reducing the friction. I think it's underestimated how much that one decision of like, I'm going to say my workforce has a new tool, and if it's frictionless and it's easy and it provides value to your employees, they will use it. Like versus consumers that are going to be having to find a new problem to solve or do something new. Is we want to collaborate as people, and I think that's gets often underestimated.
I want to clarify a little bit. When I say target, I mean the demographic. Who would be who's your end consumer? Who would be your largest target end consumer?
But I think everyone who works.
So you think that the workforce will be larger than the population? That's professional. I mean everything. So it would be like suggesting that only professionals make up the majority of everything on the internet.
Right, but I'm saying that they are there's one decision maker to influence the most amount of people, therefore they're the target that will have it at a flip of a switch versus having to go convince an entire demographic, young or old or anywhere, that'll be just different.
Are you not asking a definitional question to a panel that said there was no definition?
No, it's really when somebody tries to figure out who am I building this for, they have a target market. We build games, we build software towards target markets. We know how old they are, we know if they're male or female. We know demographics of who we're going to because that's our market share that we know to go after. So the question is, who is the target market that will be the largest that we think will be for this?
So I'll flip that question a little bit and say that the generation that's growing up right now, probably young teens, they're going to be the driving force behind getting something of good use metaverse, essentially. So maybe a little bit of history that we talk about. Nobody in this room, I think, would say closed off internet, kind of like AOL, is a good idea today. And I think that, and today, for us, it's all about the openness. I think this generation that's growing up, they're going to come into the workforce, they're going to come into their grown-up stage and be like, why isn't this already here, kind of thing. And in a way, there's a reason Microsoft Office and Google Docs and stuff are provided free for students, because when they enter the workforce, they already know how to use it. And if that's not provided to them, they're going to be asking, what place am I working in? So I think that's the environment that they've grown up in, with the iPads, with the Chromebooks and stuff, that they've essentially learned since the day they're born. They're sitting in front of YouTube videos, since they're 5 days old, maybe. So they're going to really drive the need for it. The use cases and who buys it and stuff probably come second.
I think it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem when you look at the application that the metaverse would provide, because it's largely dependent on that which kind of demographic this captures. So, like, for instance, I have a buddy who sometimes lives with me. We work together at Unity. We're both huge gaming nerds. And he's a couple of years younger than me, and he's a huge TikTok nerd. Like, he spends an inordinate amount of time on this platform, and I don't know why. I don't understand it. And it's like, I had internet before the WWW came along, so it's kind of like this weird moment where you suddenly notice, hey, am I just getting older, or is this just stupid? But in the end, I believe that, the application sometimes captures like a certain demographic, but if you have like a really useful tool that most people use, like, for instance, search or maps or things like that, where you can organize your life better, that's something that captures a larger group. So depending on that type of metaverse application that we'll see first, we'll see either sort of like the demographics fluently shifting over, and as Shazam said in the beginning, it's then just called the internet. Nothing has changed. It's just more comfy.
And I think you've got it spot on. I think the people, when we don't have a definition of the metaverse, I don't particularly want a definition of the metaverse, but the next steps, I think, are a lot clearer than what it looks like in the future. The next steps are, it's going to be a device that's in front of you. It's going to be 3D. And who are the people that are closest to that right now? They are the people who are under 20, who are in front of TikTok, who are in Roblox, who are in Minecraft, who are experiencing a 3D world. They've got the smallest step to take to engage with what we think the next step of the metaverse is. And I think they're the people who are getting into business now, getting into jobs, into education, and that's where we're going to start. The people we need to target, because they're the ones who are going to accept it first.
All right. So I would agree with my colleagues up here, and I would also offer a little twist on this. It's not disingenuous to say everybody is the audience for the metaverse. And the reason that everybody is the audience for the metaverse is because, and I'll say it, Gen Xers. Yes, Gen Xers, you are welcome. And it's because the first people in modern society that grew up appropriating computers into their lives was that generation. And so there is a hard wall between my parents and my generation that grew up wanting to pull technology into their lives, trying to understand how it fit into those spaces. And then guess what? We didn't stop playing games. We didn't stop using computers. We grew up and we had kids. And guess what happened? All those kids grew up in a house with parents who said, of course computers should be in here. Of course we should be connected to the network. Of course we should be playing games together. Now, the use cases or the possibility space that the metaverse inhabits is going to be different based on who we are at what different times in our lives, literally where we are throughout the day. It is how do we present those services, those experiences that are in the proper context for who I am, what I'm doing, where I am, devices available to me at any given time. Big problems to solve for. But just as impactful, and remember, we've only lived with the internet, as most people recognize it, for 25 years. And in a quarter of a century, it's fundamentally changed every facet of the planet. So, the metaverse is just a massive kind of step function of what we've already experienced via the web. Hopefully we've learned some lessons from the past, but when I say the metaverse is for everybody, it will absolutely be for everybody, because the time that vision of what we hope it to be gets here, you will have the vast majority of the population on the planet who has willfully adopted connected technologies and interactivity into their lives. It's a very different proposition than the web started from.
Do you have any other afterthoughts? Because I kind of screwed up asking you the question.
When you focus on the demographic part of your question, right? I like your everyone perspective, because I imagine a place like my kids went home. Like, I have 2 kids with crazy learning disabilities, and they had to figure out how to homeschool, right? Online school. We had to learn how to read a clock first so they could figure out what class they're supposed to be in. And you would think they're little, they're not. But the idea of having a collaborative, immersive classroom is coming around the corner. And I think that is going to be some of, like, then you're going to take a whole generation of kids who can, there's no spatial audio in Zoom. My son would be annoyed all the time that he couldn't ask, like, oh, well, what did she say, teacher, without interrupting the teacher, or like all the questions and topics I've had, like spatial audio matters to a lot of collaboration. And so my collaboration answer was because I think that people need collaboration and spatial audio and some of the tools that brings us at every age, right? Because I also like can imagine grandma who doesn't want to FaceTime and actually turn on her video, but wants to sit down crisscross applesauce as if she could next to her grandkids and read a story, right? And to create these environments that are from generation to generation. I watched my mother-in-law put on a headset and just watch, like, holy cow, like the world can be around us in different. And so I think it will reach all generations in really interesting ways and also connect people in really special ways that takes things like age almost doesn't matter, because and the funnest thing is when we put executive teams in headsets all the time. Like, this is the new thing, right? People came back to the office. Oh, let's bring an innovation team to go put a whole bunch of people on in a headset and give them an experience. They have fun. And that's why there's half of this room is full of gamers, is because they're having a fun experience doing something that's learning, teaching them, opening doors of new ideas, and it's fun. And it doesn't matter what your age or demographic is, you're having a fun moment. We've seen, like, we have the most boring board meetings, right? Like, our board is filled with a lot of amazing executives, but they laughed all day by putting on a headset and having an experience to just do something simple. So I think fun is ageless. And so that's my demographic.
One problem I think that needs to be addressed quite early on is the problem of content creation. Because all platforms that we see today that are successful in some way or another make it easy for people to contribute. And without these people, they're just empty hulls. So in order for the metaverse to have like this living, breathing community that actually builds it, it has to be easy to contribute anything. And sometimes we think of this as, you know, like, for instance, my nephew, he sees a monitor and he does the swipey thing on it and is then really confused that nothing happens. That's the mode that, yeah, or a book with the book might work, right? But that's a mode he grew up with. And sometimes we believe, okay, this is just the only problem. Is okay, this generation just has to grow up with this new thing. But it turns out that, at least for 3D content, it's surprisingly difficult to make it easy for people to create content. There's like a million ways to screw up. I fondly remember Second Life and all the troubles that happened there when they started introducing server-side scripting to people, and they would create endless loops and crash everything. And then we have the other issue is that in creating worlds, that's an issue that we inherit from games is the artistry problem. So you want to make the world look like in your vision, right? And the tools that they're not there yet. In contrast to many other things, like for instance, everybody and their dog has a YouTube channel because cutting videos and creating YouTube videos is extremely easy in comparison to 30 years ago when it was an absolute nightmare to get anything on screen that looked okay. So I believe this is a central starting problem also for us for the Open 3D engine. How do we make it easy for normal people that have no prior experience to jump into this and create something that doesn't fall apart on first sight?
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting taking a look at what happens, because when you start opening up that programmability, that thing in Second Life when they opened up scripting, Just imagine the security holes that could come around when somebody builds a metaverse black hole bomb. That literally like just starts wiping accounts, starts blasting blockchains, starts taking out instances.
Yeah, because
You know,
it will happen there.
And it can, and you're right, it can and it would happen.
Yeah.
So just keep that in the back of your head that things you may not have thought are possible, all of a sudden can open up. But we've learned from them once before, they could just be at a much, much larger scale, just to terrify you a little bit, that's all. So, but all right, so the next question here is, do you feel the metaverse will impact people at the same rate as the web did?
I think potentially more so. If the metaverse becomes as immersive as we expect it to be, and we look at how the Gen Z people, or Gen Z, knowing what country I'm in, is adopting more immersive technology, it's going to have such a bigger impact because the immersiveness will just make much more of an impact on people's lives. So potentially it's got that opportunity to impact it more than what the internet did.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if we look at the history of how technology has made impact, and I'm not just talking the internet technology, I'm talking, let's say, industrial revolution kind of technology. Every time we've had something disruptive come through, the step function, as described before, has been bigger. The step function that smartphones introduced was way bigger than what was the advent of the web browser with Internet Explorer and Netscape and stuff. So I think the step function that the metaverse introduces, or the ideas behind the metaverse introduce, is going to be far larger than what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I think so. I agree. It's going to happen much faster, and I think it's also going to happen much faster because of the commoditization of compute hardware. Because when the web first showed up, everyone's like, "Oh, look what we can go in and do! We're going to create these crazy, awesome websites and shopping experiences, new devices for your home." Anyone ever remember the 3Com Audrey? It's fantastic. Web appliance. Ever remember web appliances? Those were great. 200 megahertz machines trying to go ahead and crush stuff through a browser that wasn't fully formed yet. But what we've had now is a quarter of a century of faster and faster compute at the edge, lower and lower cost devices. When you could get a magazine with a Raspberry Pi on the front of it for free that was more powerful than the desktop you had 5 years prior, right? We now see this powerful, malleable compute fabric in the world that we'll be able to leverage. And we've been acclimating society to understanding that we do work and we do connect through this connected experience. Our identity is now part of that internet, that fabric, different modalities of interaction, whether it's 3D games, which, let's face it, right, that's the bleeding edge. Those are the one, that's kind of the segment that first adopts all of these things to try to figure out what the possibility of it looks like, and then that expands outward, right? So I think, again, with commoditization of hardware, the proliferation of compute devices at scale, the willingness to participate, massive compute at the edge, lower cost with higher bandwidth connectivity globally, those things set the stage for the metaverse to impact society much faster than the web did.
I'm going to answer it in two parts. One is an observation that is interesting. I think every one of the panelists that I've heard this week has studied the history of innovation in order to have an informed opinion about where the next phase is going. And so if you don't study the history of innovation, of what have been the trends in your industry, of whatever they are, and I've been schooled by some industries I don't know well this week too, so I have more learning to do. I think it's really interesting, right? If you're going to be here on the cutting edge of something, really have to understand where you're coming from. And I just keep hearing that in this. But answering, and back to the actual question, which was, I forgot I had a whole answer ready to go.
Do you think the metaverse will impact people at the same rate as the web?
Same rate as the web. I think in all the examples you gave of, it's almost unfair because we didn't have tech skills in the world when the web was invented, right? Like we didn't have home PCs around, right? Like my phone was still stuck on the wall. I think I had a Garfield phone, right? Like in my middle school bedroom. Like it's almost unfair to compare the two in that sense because we have such a a breadth of knowledge and skills in the world. But I also think that because we have tech skills all over the world, that change will happen everywhere and in little ways, and that's good, right? This won't be only the huge companies that win in the metaverse. This is innovation happens everywhere, every day, and the ability to create standards, I think, will then allow us to then collaborate together and do new things. Because if we wait for one company to have a product, we're all going to be like, oh my gosh, they said the product was going to be released next month. It's not. It's delayed. We added more features. We added more requirements. We came up with more problems to solve. And then we can't wait for one IT department to just push this industry forward. This needs to be innovation everywhere. And so the more we can collaborate around the tools and the utilities and the things that get it done, we can actually meet it at the speed, because now our expectations are faster than reality, and that's a problem, right? That like trough of disillusionment that comes after like the curve is, I'm now like, okay, where is it? Like, let's go. And so I think it'll be fun in that way.
Seems like a continual theme.
Hurry up, let's go.
It's like, come on, we're not there already? What's happening here?
So I think I'll be the odd one out to say that I'm not entirely certain it will do that. It depends on the use case. Things that are disruptive, they're not just disruptive because we call them that. They're disruptive because they change fundamentally the way we act and think. And because they solve like a very specific use case that many people share, that aren't even aware that this was a solution in the first place. And I think in our discussions we sometimes have to be careful, because we even though we didn't come up with a definition, we're all kind of we're a bit of a bubble here, right? This room is full of nerds that think alike, and that's the problem, is we have to include the people that don't think like us, that look at this and say, what is this good for? How does this make my life any better? If we don't reach these people, then this won't have the same adoption rate, and it will just crash against the wall as another hype. So I think depending on whether or not we here can grab people outside of this circle, that makes the difference of whether or not the impact will be larger than the internet.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, very good point. So, next question. How do you see open standards and open source projects, like the Open 3D engine, self-plug there, help drive a level playing field for the interoperability and timing of the metaverse?
Well, that's easy. I'm going to be the first to say that open source and open standards, these two are, at least in my opinion, these are the only two people, not the two people, the two places that I put my trust in, because otherwise there's some company that comes along, without naming anyone specifically, that slaps their name across this whole thing and declares it their own. Right? So for timing and for making this a success, open standards are obviously a key ingredient, but open source, like the Open 3D engine, are needed to have the default implementation that you can look at and say, this is the one that's standards compliant. Here is something that you can compare yourself against to, so that we don't end up in a situation that is similar to the browser wars, where we find ourselves where 90% of the population seemingly uses this one single browser framework, and it's not an open standard anymore. We have to continue to look at this and say we have to diversify the implementations and have as many as possible, and we have to force that constantly, because people are lazy. Like, I'm lazy. It just happens.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is that the only way we solve these big, incredible, nested problems is through open source and open standards. When we're talking about the web and ubiquity of a browser and of the HTML5 standard, we're still not at 100% compatibility across every device, but it's the closest we have, right, to a universal translator? How are we going to do this if it's all closed to deliver identity and security across every one of these different bespoke or closed walled garden sorts of environments? And we were having a conversation, before, we took the stage here about, what era are we in right now? And it feels kind of like we're in the you got mail era, right? You all remember, like back then, it's like, oh, I bought the internet today. You did? What do you mean? Oh, I got this disc from AOL, and I bought this connection through AT&T, so I got the internet at home. And you're like, you did? That's fantastic. No, you did not. That's not the internet. But yes, it is, because that's the way we were able to describe concepts or things that we didn't really understand, right? And so what we're really describing was the utility of those things. We're in that same phase right now of the metaverse. It's not any one place or one destination or one modality. It is everything about me in the physical world that I try to represent in that digital world. The only way to solve those problems is agreed upon open standards, open platforms. It's one of the reasons why I was so happy to join the team at AWS focusing on the Open 3D engine, because when you look at some of the other members that have joined, right, Foundation, and you look at Epic, for example, and talks about and Mark mentioned today in that opening, in his opening remarks that, we need something that allows us to interoperate with all of these other types of engines or experiences. I like to say that O3DE has the best chance to become the mortar between the bricks of the metaverse. You want to get out of one space into another, you have to have a translation layer through which you can pass these things. It can't be done by one company. It can't be done, just by one specific direction of technology. It has to be done out in the open. It has to be built upon standards. So the only way we get to that future is by being open and transparent.
I feel like I kind of answered that question, so I'm going to answer my own.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to offer what I think is interesting is most people I talk to, if they're not technologists, they think open source means my company can't make money at solving this problem. Mm-hmm. Period, full stop. And it is a massive, we talked about needing a definition for metaverse. How about we talk about and actually advertise the definition of why open source will allow you to make money faster? Mm-hmm. We all got to get back to value, right, in this. And if we can use and contribute together, we can actually get to where we're making money faster together. And that's a business case I can sell to anyone and talk about why we accelerate. Back to my speed. Sorry, speed's my problem.
I love it.
There's lots we can do, but I think we all of it need to do a better job in talking about how does this accelerate getting to value, because value is what drives the economy across the board and why we're here.
There's nothing really much more to add other than we need something. There's going to be a lot of companies that aren't going to want to open source, that aren't going to want to have open standards, but still want to be in the metaverse. And that layer, looking at O3D, if that does become the mortar that whatever it was, that very nice line that I've forgotten that you said.
Yeah, don't worry, Nicole's going to print that one later.
Yeah, if that's what it becomes, and that's great because if everyone is going to connect, everything is going to connect, something needs to be in place to have these people who don't want to open source, who don't want to use open standards, who don't want to potentially put the effort into being involved, to be able to be involved. And that's quite cool. And it all boils down to the business models, like you said. Are people scared? Are companies scared of, I have a thing that is valuable to me? I've been promised this wonderful future of a utopian metaverse where I'm going to make lots more money, but I don't believe it, but I still want to be involved in it. I still want to say I'm a metaverse company, but I don't want to put any risk in there at all. So I want to keep my walled garden, but I still want to use yours as well. I think that's going to be the near-term reality, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree, but I'd like to add two more points. I think when we speak about open source and open standard, especially when it comes to the layman, the non-engineer, somebody who hasn't come from the open background, I think it's important to also educate them on the difference between open source and open standards. Open standards are the way our computers, well, I'll use computers in the loose term of it, communicate with each other, whereas open source is not the version of some implementation of it that, like was mentioned before, that doesn't preclude proprietary software from coming up with innovations and making money. Open source is a way of the community gathering together and being like, hey, if anybody wants to use this, contribute to it. It's free for everybody, but anybody who wants to innovate and patent the software and stuff. But at the same time, communicate using those same open standards. That's what is going to drive innovation. And at some point, just like patents expire, we are going to see those innovations happen in proprietary and commercial software, making their way into open source when it is no longer a differentiator, a moneymaker for those companies. So that's a key point that I like to educate on, that absolutely open source and open standards are important, and educating everybody on those is key. The second point I'd like to make is when we talk about open standards, it's also important not to duplicate our work and get the different standards talking to each other. For example, identity talking to 3D, or finance and crypto and tokenization talking to how game engines and different metaverses will share assets, and all of those things. And I think I'd like to give a shout out to the Metaverse Standards Forum, who's helping drive that, that integration between different technology and different standards organizations, rather than trying to come up with something new. I'm sure all of us are aware of that XKCD. We have 13 standards. Let's try to introduce a new standard that covers all the other standards. Now we have 14 standards. I think that is a problem we have to avoid. And once we get different standard people and leaders talking to each other, I think that's the only way to go about it.
So, and just to kind of add to that, so from my perspective, because obviously I'm at the Linux Foundation, right? So I've literally charted part of my career in this direction. And to me, it was a way to be a part of an industry, to influence an industry without competing in the industry. That's the biggest thing. People think, oh, well, you jumped into O3D, so you're competing against everybody. But I'm not. Because you can't buy from me. I can't sell to you. I give you everything that I have. I share everything with you. You contribute if you want to, or you don't want to. I find ways to enable your business to grow faster. I work on your business cases. I find other partners to work alongside with you. And I get to change entire industries without ever being in opposition, flying a neutral flag at all times. So something to consider when you're looking at open source and when you're looking at different groups. The key element here when we're talking about open source and open standards comes down to communication and leadership. Because everybody has an idea, but it's actually getting people to come together with the right experts in the right industry to have the right conversation that you can execute on. Because talk is cheap until you can put it down to paper. And that is one of the key fundamentals of why I got involved in this in the first place, why I even decided to create a Metaverse track at O3D, because it was the right time with the right people to ask the right questions. Not to compete, not to collide, but to augment, to grow. And so something that you should really keep in consideration across the board of why we all work together. It's not one company or one open source project. It is all of them together and how they work. I'm getting off my soapbox now. So, last question. How will content, IP, and trust be addressed in this new environment? Yeah. That's right.
I have to say this is the one question that I'm afraid of, because it's the one it's literally the one topic where we run danger that there's going to be one player that is going to hijack the system. It's the identity question that you came up with, right? Is if you think of the internet as this decentralized system where everybody needs to come together and still agree on something, like identity. So far, that didn't work quite so well. Now I have 5 logins across 5 major platforms that apparently control 90% of the internet, and so they control identity. And this is a mistake we should not repeat. But the solution to that, I'm not sure. Like there's like a bunch of technologies that people have fooled around with. Blockchain would be one thing, for instance, that has issues of its own. We have seen open source protocols like ActivityPub and, for instance, the Mastodon project, Fediverse project, where you have a federated approach to social media that is similar to email, a protocol that is still working today, and multiple people can just fire up their own service and the system just keeps working. And for these 5 questions that you had, like especially for the identity question, I'm kind of curious if you have an idea of how, for instance, to solve this identity problem, because I don't.
Not putting you on the spot here. By the way, we have 5 minutes. So.
No. No, I mean, the problem is a very big problem, right? And we start thinking about one of the promises, right, of the metaverse is I'm going to own everything that I make, and I'm going to be able to take all of those things and everything that I am into all of these different spaces, right? And I'd like to, point out that if you're in New York and you buy a designer shirt and you get on a plane and you take 3 flights across the country and get into Los Angeles, every single person that saw you in every one of those different places saw this person with this, this fashion or name brand shirt, and its value held true across every stop along the way. And when I landed in Los Angeles, it didn't cost the city of LA any more money to render, the shirt for me to walk around in. We don't have that same portability, right? We don't have that same portability with digital assets. Who's going to pay for the transaction? If I'm moving outside of one environment to the other, who actually performs that operation? How do I make sure that my identity and the object is coming out of this closed garden database? It's been severed there, so the object no longer exists here, so it holds its value. And the identity of the person that's exiting with it is also the same person, and we can authenticate that going into this environment where they may go by a completely different name, and the object doesn't look the same. And so what I have to do is preserve the metadata, the essence of the object, even if I have to change its appearance. Do I have the legal right to bring it in there? Have companies signed specific rights agreements with one environment versus the other? These are incredibly complex problems. So the answer is no, we don't have an answer yet. No one company does. But if I think about where the problem lies, it's how do we create the ownership of transmission or mutability of the object and have it embedded in the object itself. So you're not policing all of the inventory for a company, but it's each individual object has the ability to maintain, release, and re-authenticate as you move forward. Sounds like a great area for something like blockchain. The problem is we all know that there's scalability issues with the current, the way we think about that. So again, nobody has the answer to the problem yet. But what I do believe it's going to require is federated systems of agreed upon standards for interlocking identity and security, ownership and permissibility. If we don't get there, then the metaverse that we're talking about doesn't really emerge in the way we think it's going to be. It becomes something entirely different.
I just want to, before we pass on the microphone, I just want to add one requirement, so to say, on top, which is there's a type of identity that sits on top of this stack that we need to include, maybe unfortunately. It's the identity of being anonymous.
Yeah.
And there's going to be lots more sessions and discussions in the Birds of the Feather tomorrow on
Yes.
identity. And later today with Sam.
There is a
and
Great
others.
assistant, please come to that one.
You guys have some of the world's leading identity thinkers in the room, right? which is fascinating. But back to like content and IP and how it matters. Like we cannot underestimate how creative people are all over the world, and they have something to say and they have something to share. And that is why the internet went from somewhere to read like a news article of what should you read to a we all contribute and we all create. Like as we create these new spaces, as we think about core requirements of it, the fundamentals are people are really interesting. They've all got something to say, and they've all got something to share, and they've all got something to create. Like, we already have thousands of people who are customizing spaces, right, in our environment. But like, people are smart all over the world, no matter where they are. And so I encourage all of you, because you're all designing systems that are doing cool things, is to give people a voice and to really like weigh into that. Content should be created everywhere and shared everywhere, and the ability to have traceability of where does your content go and be able to give royalty back to creators in different parts of the world is brings online economies that aren't online today. And maybe it's just through their phones, right? Because they've only got a phone. But like finding ways to encourage that creation economy, but also then giving royalties to creators through that model will allow us to, we've got influencer models today. But putting that at the core of it, because people have really interesting things to say, and we shouldn't miss that in our designs.
So I want to focus on the trust part, because that to me is by far the most interesting. And I don't think it's a technological problem. I think a lot of these problems, once we know how we can solve it, or know why we should solve it, we can find ways to solve it. I think there's almost like a societal problem of how we change trust between companies, the end user, technology, and that boils down to what's going to happen if you are in the metaverse, and how does it work? You have your PC or your phone in front of you. You're not going to swap software all the time. Things are going to have to be constantly installed on your machine and then removed from your machine in order to be able to engage in the metaverse in the way you want to do it. And that requires a trust with a technology company to say, I'm going to give you access to my machine, and you can do what you like to it. I just have to trust that you're doing the right thing. And that is a societal shift with how do we take companies and make sure that the end user trusts them to do those things. I mean, I'm a gamer. I'm skeptical of everything. I don't trust any technology company out there, and, except for Linux
Trust
Foundation,
issues.
O3DE, of course. And I would imagine I am not unique. I think many people are the same. And there's this big societal shift where the companies that will succeed in the metaverse are the ones that create that trust with the end user. I mean, to give an example, I decorated my house last week, and I wanted to put my Xbox on the wall. So I found a company that make wall mounts for an Xbox, and I ordered a thing from them, and it came through a couple of days later. I thought, brilliant, that's great. Then 2 days later, I get an email from them saying, oh, we also sell this. And I was like, I know I didn't tick that box that said you could send me marketing emails. And now I just don't trust this company anymore. And that behavior has to stop, and we have to create that trust with the end users in order to let them allow us to do the things we need to do to make the metaverse work.
I agree with everything that's been said around identity and trust and stuff. I'm not an expert in that area, but I definitely agree that it's a problem. It's a big problem, and it needs to be solved. I'll focus on the first part of your question, which was like, how do we create the content? And I think that's an interesting question. Tope touched on it a little bit earlier, that everybody needs to be creating. I think the example with video creation was great, that kids these days know how to edit videos. I think there's going to be coming a shift soon that kids will know how to create 3D models. So that will definitely happen. I think AI is going to be a huge part of it. I think we are all seeing engines like DALL-E and others where you give it a statement and you get an image. And yes, there's a whole set of copyright issues around it, and the courts haven't dealt into it, so I'm not going to get into that. But AI generating 3D content, 3D worlds is going to be a key part of how we create new content. And then capturing the real world, whether that's through satellites, drones, or even our iPhones that have LiDAR scanners in them, converting videos and photos to 3D models, and the generation processes around that, the photogrammetry around that. I think anything that is capturing how we see the real world around us is going to be a way to create content for the metaverse, that we're going to just see how immersive it becomes from that.
Awesome. So it's kind of interesting to think about it, and I brought this up in one of the earlier sessions, is that right now, think about it. Somebody makes a TikTok, right? That thing hits online like that. That means content, I'll up on my own timer. That means that content in this kind of metaverse, in this 3D world, has got to be publishable in the same model. They've got to be able to make it and update it. It's not like we're taking the metaverse experience down for an hour for maintenance. So content creators have to be able to create content and update it dynamically without breaking everybody, being able to kind of append to it. But at the same time, we talk about trust. So AI, anybody seen the cool looking pictures and models and things that AI are making today? Do you trust that someone made it? Who owns the IP? Where does it go? How does that come into play? Think about that for a little bit of a, ear bender. And then, and how does that fall into the play of jurisdictional area? What do you do with user-generated content? How's that going to proliferate? What's fair use? There's so many elements because, okay, that 3D model was built somebody, but is it a fair use if I use it in something that's not representative of what I was doing at the time? So we have a whole different arena, not just outside of creation of content and trust, but how we're actually going to do that from laws and rules that we have today that kind of apply, maybe, sort of apply, that we've been trying to adjust all this time. So I would say if anybody has, we got maybe 10, 15 seconds or any other last thoughts you want to throw in because we're a little bit over time. But
one quick one I want to throw in the back of your brain pan for a minute. So we're talking about trust changes. Mm-hmm. Anyone remember Napster? Yeah, I'm going to open up my computer to the raw, Napster network, and people could comb through my entire damn drive, but I'll get free music. All my tax returns, everything else are in there that people sifted through. That's what happened. And people are like, no, but I'm getting free music. If they can see my music, I can see theirs. Yes, and you threw all your music into your documents folder, right? Because people didn't know what they were actually opening themselves up to, right? And so when we talk about trust changes based on the value they believe they can extract from a particular action. So it is up to the companies and the communities that build these services, serve people, to understand that changes all the time and work as best we can to protect those that depend most on the systems that we build, right? Super, super important as we build that future for everyone. So,
any other quick last comments from anyone?
I'm encouraged to see what all of you create after this week. I want to follow you all on Twitter, and I want you all to challenge, what did I learn? What did I think? What did I share from someplace unexpected? Because I think this group is taking the time to step out of their day job and learn and experience what does the new many futures or one future we may create together. So I challenge you all to just share that back.
And mind you, that part of what we're doing here is, since everybody is signed up and a part of this, we'll be sending out an email so that we can keep these conversations going. So please don't distrust me as a result of it. But it's to keep this conversation going because there's a lot of brain power that's in each one of these sessions. And we're at that point we can actually do something about it, and it's interesting.
I want to add to that. It's not just, I'm also curious what people create, but I'm most curious is the engineering soul in me. Please break things. Make things go wrong and explode. That's how we know what isn't working and what we need to fix.
Awesome. You guys good? I'm good. You good? All right. Thank you.